What is going on, guys? I'm back today with another list video for you, and I've been really excited to make some lists surrounding horror movies because it is October, and horror is my favorite genre of film. If you guys have been following me for a while, you know I review movies of all different genres and types, but horror is always my favorite. And I think from a very young age, one of the things that I was drawn to about horror was it felt like a genre that sort of brought together people that are all incredibly unique or that come from backgrounds where they felt like outcasts or that they don't belong. And I think horror is a genre that really is inclusive of everybody. It's always really cool to see it like horror film conventions or to see people that are like huge fans of horror genres. How many different people you get from all walks of life and backgrounds. And I just think there's something so beautiful about horror as a genre. And it's really interesting because when I was a very, very young kid, horror scared the crap out of me. I was honestly really afraid to watch horror movies when I was little. And I feel like once I hit like 11 or 12 years old, I started to really take an interest in horror movies. And so I thought today a fun topic to talk about with you guys would be horror movies from my youth that I can remember viscerally scaring me, like horror films that when I was a child, I remember watching and either giving me nightmares or that I couldn't purge it from my mind. Because obviously, I've watched hundreds and hundreds of horror movies in my life now, and it takes a lot to get to me anymore. But as a younger kid, it was much easier to do. And so I thought today I would give you guys a list of some movies that genuinely scared me when I was a kid, and I'm excited to put this out there for you today and talk about them a little bit with you. So first up on this list is going to be the 1960 film 13 Ghosts from director William Castle. No, not the 2000s 13 Ghosts, but this is the 1960 iteration, which funny enough, I've not seen this movie in years. But the first time I watched this, I was 7 or 8 years old, and I remember it completely and totally horrified me. There's a couple of scenes in this movie that I can very specifically remember. As far as the film as a whole, it's been way too long for me to remember all of the plot. But there were specifically a couple of scenes that something in my young 6 and 7 year old brain could not process this. And I remember staying awake at night and like literally not being able to sleep, bugging my parents while they were asleep and being like, I can't handle this anymore. And for some reason, this movie in particular set the precedent at a young age where I was like, I don't want to watch horror movies anymore because they freaked me out so much because of this black and white 1960 William Castle movie. Which, funny enough, I wanted to mention it today because I have not seen it in years and years and years, but it really makes me want to revisit it because as a young kid, it really messed me up. I don't know what about it in particular really got to me, but I thought that would be a fun one to mention because that kind of put me off from horror movies at a young age. And I sort of picked back up at 10 or 11 years old. But this was the first movie that I can really viscerally remembering messing with my head as a young child. Next is going to be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The first time I watched this movie, I was 11 or 12 years old, and I think it was either on like the Sci-Fi Channel or something on TV, or my parents had it on VHS. And I remember very specifically being horrified at the scene with the woman in the bathtub when Jack Torrance goes in there. And something about that, I remember at a very young age, I could not even go into the bathroom in my house without pulling the shower curtain back every single time because I was so worried that that woman was going to show up. And there's so many images. I mean, this is a movie, it's one of the greatest horror films of all time for a reason. It's eerie, atmospheric, it has amazing performances. There's so much about it to genuinely love. But I think one of the things that makes it such an exceptional horror film is the amount of imagery that you can just pull a single still frame image and it's just like spine tingling. It's one of the things that I think Kubrick nailed so perfectly about the film is creating so much memorable imagery that sticks in your brain. And I think at a young child watching this at like 10 or 11 years old, it was just one of those things that for me particularly, I just thought about some of those images and it just really horrified me. Obviously, the two little girls in the middle of the hallway is an image that has been used over and over and over again. But as a kid, it really unsettled me a lot. And there's so many moments in this movie that I just feel like did that. Also, the music of the film, I was never able to purge it from my mind. And it's so funny as an adult now, I listen to this soundtrack a lot. I also love the other music, not just the score, but I also love like Midnight and the Stars and You. I think there's so many great moments of music in this that just make the experience so memorable. It's impossible to watch The Shining and not just leave feeling like, an attachment to it in one way or another. Like, even if you don't love the film, I feel like Stanley Kubrick, what makes him such an amazingly talented talented artist and why he was so great in his career while he was alive is that he was able to create so much memorable imagery. And this was a film really shook me up when I was a young kid, and to this day it makes me uncomfortable when I watch it. It's not as viscerally scary as it was when I was a young kid, but I still appreciate what it's doing, and I think it's one of the greatest horror films ever made. Up next is the Tobe Hooper film Poltergeist. This is another one, probably sometime between the ages of 10 to 12. Parents showed this to me, and I remember very specifically the scene with the clown. I could not sleep for like a week. It like freaked me out so much. Luckily, my brother and I, that were around the same age, we didn't have a lot of toys that resembled this, but I always wanted to check under my bed. I was scared to death every single day at what was going to happen in my room when the lights went out because of this film. I think this is another movie. Imagery is everything. There's a lot of really iconic images. There's also a lot of moments that are seared into my brain. Just this young child being drawn to this evil entity. There's something so horrific about it, and I feel like the movie does an amazing job really creating a very bleak tone around a family that's just trying to exist living in this house. And it's a movie that, as I've revisited it throughout the years, I've just grown a fonder appreciation because I think it's a really great horror movie. And I didn't mention it on this list, but I saw Poltergeist 2 very quickly after it, and that movie also freaked me out quite a bit. And there's a lot of imagery as a young kid that really sat with me. And I haven't revisited this franchise in a long time, and I need to change that because I really love the original Poltergeist. I think it's an incredible film, but that's another one that's embedded in my brain, that there's so many scenes in that movie that I just remember as a kid really shaking me up. Up next is the film Something Wicked This Way Comes from director Jack Clayton, based on the Ray Bradbury novel. I watched this the first time at like 9 or 10 years old, and I remember something about just the carnival and the sinister nature of it, and these people going into these things thinking that their wildest dreams can come true, and the worst possible thing in the world happening to them afterwards. There's something like when you're a child, like the allure of grandeur, like when it, like going to an amusement park, or like, you know, seeing a show. Spectacle when you're young is everything, right? Like you get so excited about these things that are alluring and that draw your attention in, and to have it be sinister underneath the surface, there's something about that that I just think is really incredible when you explore that idea. And I think the Bradbury novel is brilliant, and I loved it when I was growing up. And this is a movie, I think they put it on Disney Plus or something recently, like remastered it or some way or another. I have an original DVD copy of this film. I haven't seen it in about 8 years. I was planning on watching it this month. I'm hoping that I can get around to it before Halloween because it's a movie that meant a lot to me. I'm curious as to how it would resonate with me at this period in my life in comparison to when I was much younger. But I watched this movie all the time when I was a kid. I thought that it was really great. It's something that left a lasting impact on me and genuinely scared me when I was younger. Up next is the film The Others. I did a review on this not that long ago. It's now available in the Criterion Collection. I saw this film for the first time in 2001 when it came out, and this movie made me sick as a child. I was horrified by it. I found the twist at the end of the movie to be just so much of a gut punch. It really made me feel awful when I was watching it. Something about it, like this movie just has so much atmosphere, and there's so many scenes in particular that are genuinely horrifying. And I love a ghost story, and as a kid there's nothing that I was more afraid of than a ghost story. So I think that that's what works so brilliantly about this. I think Nicole Kidman's performance is just exceptional. The two young actors in the movie do a really great job, but there's so many scenes. The scene in the room with the woman with the veil over her head, there's just so much in that moment in particular that I remember as a child really messing with me, and that I had a very difficult time with. My brother and I both like really shook us up when we were younger. I had a really hard time dealing with a lot of the imagery in that movie, and it's one that sat with me ever since I've watched it, and I own a Criterion copy of it now. It's a film that I love revisiting. I think it's a classic. I think more people need to talk about it. It's that good of a movie, and it's one that really left a lasting impression on me when I was younger. Next is a movie that I just reviewed recently, and that's What Lies Beneath. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. This movie came out in the year 2000. I watched it very shortly after. I can't remember if I rented it or what I did. Watched it with my family. I was like 11 or 12 years old. And while rewatching it this time, I was like, okay, it's not really that scary. As a young kid, seeing visions of a dead woman in your bathroom and in a lake outside of your house, there was something about that that did not sit with me in the right way. And I remember as a young kid, the house that we were living at this time period, I was so scared to go in the bathroom after I watched this movie. I was afraid every time I took a shower and the mirror fogged up that I was going to see the reflection of a dead person in it. And as a young kid, I loved Harrison Ford. I was willing to watch anything that he was in. And I just like the twist at the end of the movie made me really sad because of how much I loved Harrison Ford. But like it's a very fun, really well made movie. And Robert Zemeckis obviously has a catalog of films that he's well known for, but this is one of the interesting ones in his career. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because I just dropped a full review. You can hear every bit of my thoughts on that movie, but I think it's a fun ride and it's still worth watching, even though as an adult, I think it's really flawed. Up next is the film Lady in White. I actually did a review of this a year or so ago. This is another movie that genuinely freaked me out as a kid. I feel like storytelling wise, this movie does a really amazing job building atmosphere and ambiance. It feels like reading a book. The performances in it are all really good. And if you watch my full breakdown and review of that movie, I had some problems with it. But as a kid, anytime you put a child in these horrific perspectives or dealing with something horrifying, this young kid getting trapped in his school early on in the movie and the things that are happening surrounding that, I just found that to be so incredibly terrifying. And there's something when you're a child and you're watching a child go on a journey like that and experience these really horrific things, it sits with you. And I think Lady in White is one of those movies that, like, when I revisited it this time, even though I could tell you some flaws that I feel like exist in the movie and some problems that I have with it, I still think it's incredibly effective at what it's setting out to do. I find it to be a very enjoyable film. I think it's really well made, and it's a movie that if you've never seen it before, you should 100% watch it. So I've got one more movie I want to talk about, but before I talk about that movie, I want to segue into a little bit of a cheat because it's not a film, but as a young child, two of the most important horror properties to me that scared me, but also got me to fall in love with the genre Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps. Both television series are really, I think, one of the strongest reasons why I love horror movies the way that I do today and why I love horror as a genre, not just for film, but also for literature and for television series. These are two perfect properties, I feel like, at a young age that kind of draw people into the horror genre and show them what can be so compelling and interesting about it. I love both formats. I thought Are You Afraid of the Dark was the scarier of the two, but there were so many stories in both of these television series that I can just viscerally remember as a kid. There's one in particular, the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, where it's the kids on the swim team and there's the guy or there's the monster that can transfer through water. And like I remember very vividly as a child being scared of the drain in my shower because I was afraid that thing was going to come up through the drain. And there's a lot of moments in Are You Afraid of the Dark like that with certain characters that I can just very much remember. And Goosebumps is similar. There's some moments throughout that, especially the Haunted Mask or Slappy. I've always hated dolls. Like I hate any kind of dolls. I was freaked out by them as a kid. And Slappy in particular, there was something very unsettling about the nature of his face and the reaction of him as a kid that messed with me a lot. And I just feel like both of those properties made me fall in love with horror later on in my life. I just loved them a lot, and I had to mention them in this video, even though I know they're not movies, because of how important they were to me and how they genuinely scared me. And then number one on this list, probably one of the films that I credit to me falling in love with horror as a genre, and the thing that scared me the most when I was a kid is Nightmare on Elm Street from the great Wes Craven. I have a Freddy Krueger tattoo right here on my arm because I love the franchise so much. It's one of the most important films to me as far as horror is concerned. I still think to this day as an adult, while I watch that movie, there's little things that you can pick apart that you're like, oh, that's silly, narratively it doesn't make sense, all of these little like nitpicks that you can make. But I think aside from that, conceptually, it's one of the coolest ideas that you can ever come up with a horror movie. You have this sick, demented individual who was murdered by the people of his community for being a sicko, and he has come back to torment the children of the parents who murdered him, and he can do it in your dreams. There's nothing like more horrifying than that. And he can take your worst nightmares and bring them to life. And there was something about the first Nightmare on Elm Street, because one of the things I love about the franchise is as it progressed forward, the dreams became more visceral and the sort of like fantastical elements of it became more and more so. But as a young child, just that very first scene of that girl getting dragged in her bedroom, like up on the wall after she's being killed in a nightmare. As a child, that's something that sat with me for so long. I was like, I cannot believe that this is happening. I can't believe someone is experiencing that. And like something about like you're not even safe in your own head is like it's an amazing concept for a horror film. And I remember as a young kid, I loved that. I know that like Robert Englund wasn't as playful as the Freddy Krueger character in the first movie, but I always just loved his performance. And I thought there was something in the first film that was so incredibly menacing about him that worked so well for me. And it's a film that has stuck with me for a really long time. I love it a lot, and I wanted to mention it today because of how much it meant to me and how much it genuinely scared me. So, what are some films when you were younger that scared you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. You guys always do an amazing job, like telling me stories or leaving me things, and I love reading them. And so, I'd be really interested to hear at a very young age, because obviously most of these for me were from the ages of like 9 to 12. What really sat with you and kind of messed with you when you were younger? As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.